Okay, guys, 6 reasons that rental properties could protect you and hedge you against inflation. Welcome to the midweek show. We've got Richard Cook today and we've got Perry McIntosh as well on to talk about this. Hi guys, how are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you.
Yeah, good.
I just had a fantastic lunch from Millie's, so that was all nice.
Good. So we're going to be talking about the 6 reasons why rental properties could be inflation-proof on your savings. I mean, inflation and recessions, it's like we're almost trying to talk this recession into existence. Let me be clear, we're not in a recession yet. Recessions are caused, put my teeth back in, recessions are caused by 2 quarters of negative growth in an economy. That's when you're officially in a recession. So if anybody mentions that word to you, you can stick it right up them and say, there's no recession right now. Go and get on your bike and stop talking about it as if it's going to happen. You know, we have to make sure that is the case. Yeah, I mean, remember, there are 6 reasons which make investing in private rental properties a potentially wise investment in these, what we call changeable times. And today the show is going to be looking at how to invest in property and Fife property as well, and how that could help you hedge against inflation and protect your savings and your wealth against a possible recession when it comes. I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I've been doing property investment for 30 years now. It is literally recession proof. It's recession proof completely because everybody needs a roof over their head. But we're going to talk about this more, about the 6 reasons and the cost of living predicament, which is threatening the budgets of many Fife landlords and households right throughout Fife and right throughout the UK as well. You know, Perry, where's inflation running about just now?
I think that's the concern that some people have, isn't it? Because inflation is running at 7.8%. But yet the best saving rates in the market at the moment are only 2.75. So do the math or maths, depending on where you come from.
Yeah, to be honest.
Exactly. And, you know, that's because the Bank of England, as we know, have got low interest rates at the moment. But it does mean that the value of people's savings are falling fast. And really, your return on those
what we mean by that is when we talk about an inflation rate of 7.8, we talk about interest rates of 2.75. We could just say 2.8. So there's a differential of 5% there. So if you put your money in the bank, it means your £1 or your £10, for example, would be worth £9.50 in terms of purchasing power in a year's time. So if you put £100 in the bank, it would mean that it would only be able to purchase £95 worth of goods in today's value. That's what that differential is, the 5% differential. Anyway, back to you, Perry.
No, I mean, that it's a good way to explain it. It's a simplistic way for people to understand it as well, isn't it? Because I think that's half the battle. It's that sometimes actually we're bamboozled by numbers and words and we don't actually really understand what's happening. But not only is the interest rates in the position that they're in, to add insult to injury, the possibility of a recession on the horizon could add another nail in the coffin on people's wealth and their savings. You know, looking back at the last recession, ignoring 2022 and back to 2020, COVID, obviously you can't really compare that. But the stock market dropped by 40.1% during the credit crunch in 2020.
Listen, I'll be honest, and if I'd known at that time, I would have bought stock like it would go into fashion. Because you know, it always recovers, doesn't it? If you've got the money, then it will always recover in terms of value. And then what you do is you just offload it when the time comes. I would never buy stock in order to get dividends because you get. Well, we'll talk about that and why rental is more important that way compared to dividends. But I would buy stock for appreciation. Because we know, well, look at. I mean, you know, 9/11 happened. It dropped down to 3.2, and then the year later it bounced back to about 6. So it just bounced back to 6. So you know, if you bought at 3.2 and it bounced back to 6 in the FTSE 100, you'd almost doubled your money then if that's the case.
It's true, I think. But when you see those headlines, it's not really a soothing thought, is it? And you know, if we're worrying about a recession looming in the next couple of years, it does tend to panic people a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is why obviously we're here to kind of educate and hopefully put people's minds at ease. But a recession can have a catastrophic impact on household budgets, can't it? We're seeing that just now. Every time you put the TV on in the morning, you're seeing stories about it, aren't we? And it does perform to a weaker economy, which characteristically means that salaries drop. Get my teeth back in.
We'll be having this challenge.
I know we do.
I had that earlier in the week. There was a word I was trying to say. I think it was horticultural.
Next.
But I think it does worry people, and then people start to worry as well about their income, their outgoings, and also, you know, their job security. So, you know, those are big concerns for people, aren't they?
Now, just to explore this a bit more, this is why, you know, what happens is when the media starts talking about this, people saying, I tell you what, I'll no go on that extra holiday. I'll maybe no spend on that night out I was going to go out. I'll maybe no do this and maybe no do that. But the knock-on effect of doing that is if you pull back on that, they don't have that income. They therefore don't need people to employ anymore because they're not doing enough that they should be doing. So if you cut back on what you're spending to them, as businesses, the business have to cut back on what they're doing to them. And then what happens is the first thing they go for is labour, because labour is usually the highest cost in a business. So they go for labour straight away, and often people get made redundant, and therefore they can't spend money because they're now redundant on these services. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy and a spiral downwards, and on a spreadsheet scenario. So the key is to try and stop that, and actually, you know, don't be concerned too much. We're going to talk about sensitivity analysis, Richard and I at show on Monday at 12:30, and what that actually means and how you should be looking at your finances and your wealth and that in order to make sure that it's not volatile, if that makes sense. You know, so sensitive analysis is all making sure that your wealth isn't volatile. So if a slight change in the economy happens, all of a sudden you're in trouble. You know, so we're going to look at sensitive analysis and give real good information about and real good tips about how to avoid being in a situation where you literally, if a small minute thing changes, it could affect you catastrophically.
It's safeguard your investment, I suppose.
Yeah,
for
safeguard,
like any slight changes in interest and things. Yeah.
So, Richard, why do I suggest that Fife rental properties will help you protect against your wealth and hedge against inflation? Then, you know, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Fife rental aren't perfect, but in many ways they do go a long way to help. And I mean, one of the most significant benefits, and you spoke about this earlier, Jim, of investing in residential property is to hedge against inflation. Now, an inflation hedge is an investment that defends against the decreasing purchasing power of your money that results from the loss of the worth or value due to inflation. So that's really important, and you mentioned that earlier, Jim. And I mean, the last time the UK suffered a high and persistent inflation was back in the 1970s. I thought this was quite interesting. So there's a couple of stats here. Like, so in 1973, the average British house price, it was worth 9,942. Yeah. And in 1998, the same house was worth 23,287. Wow. So if the same 9,942 had been invested in the stock market, and you were just saying about the stock market there, Jim, in 1973, it would have been worth 19,384 in 1980. So that's a huge
difference in terms of that's almost a 20% difference between that value in the stock market and property.
Yeah, and that's a lot, isn't it?
So how did that compare to inflation then?
Well, compared to the inflation, I mean, neither property nor stock market beat inflation in the 7 years, obviously, between 1973 to 1980. So as the goods and services of that 9,942 in 1973 had risen to 25,000, trying to get my figures right, 897 by 1980. So investing in the stock market between 1973 and 1980, the stock market investor would have lost just over 25%, 25.2% on their investment in real terms, compared to only 10.1% in property investor.
See, this is what we talk about in real terms, doesn't it? Because if you're sitting with a £10 note in your hand, it's like you've still got the £10 note in 3 years' time. And this is what I went back to the beginning. You've still got that £10 note in 3 years' time. So why is that £10 note less than what it is now? and it's literally inflation. It's because the £10 note could buy, for example, just say it could buy a gallon of petrol. It's probably about right now, to be honest. But the same gallon of petrol in 3 years' time might be £12 now. So therefore, inflation has gone up by 20%, the £2 of the £10. So inflation's gone up 20%. So your £10 is now devalued by 20%, because it can only buy almost about 80% of the petrol now that it could have bought at that point in time. So hopefully that's made it a bit clearer about, you know, how inflation. So when they talk about, because I always used to be confused when they talked about politicians, they used to talk about in real terms. I mean, to be honest, sometimes it's a bit of smoke and mirrors, you know, for politicians to make it out like in real terms. It's like, here's the bullshit coming.
They want us to be confused.
In real terms, but that's essentially what it is, isn't it?
And if they say in real terms there, obviously the person who invested in the stock market lost just over 25%. The property investor did lose just over 10%. But you need to always remember, on top of that, for that 7 year period, they've had a rental income as well. And to give you an idea of that, I mean, the average Fife landlord will earn about 61,000, just over 61,500.
That's the key.
Over a 7 year period. And
that is the key. That's what people don't realise about property investment. Property investment literally pays you to wait while it appreciates in value over the medium to long term.
That passive income as well.
And that income comes in all the time. Now, admittedly, for some people, you called it passive there, Richard, but for a lot of people, it's not passive, because they have to look after the property, they have to maintain the property, they have to jump at every whim when the tenant says there's something wrong, and then have to arrange contractors and that. But true passive income is like more or less what I've got, which is like what you look after everything start to finish. And I never really get involved. And the only thing I really do is I'll buy that one. And that's it, really. That's all I do now. So that's true passive income as far as I'm concerned, because everything's run by someone else and it doesn't rely on your efforts anymore. So we do talk about rent as in passive income, but for some people it won't be passive income at all. Hence the reason why the importance, I always say, is get a letting agent to look after it for you. I'm not caring where you are in the country. Obviously, make sure they've got a track record. Make sure you ask questions. Make sure you get referrals from people that they know, for example. You know, landlords that have used them already, who can actually vouch for them, and you can actually speak to them. That's the sort of things you would probably ask them. Check out their Google reviews. Check out their website independent reviews. So a lot of people have FIFO. We have the Estas. And they're all independent reviews. So from people that have actually used them already. So that's quite good from that point of view.
That's what I was just going to say. We always put our Estas out there because they're voted for by our landlords, or obviously our sales side as sellers, our vendors, and our buyers and things. It's people that have used their service and how their experience with
and that's really important. That's really important, isn't it? And it's not just about services. A lot of people feel that you only need to review something if you're buying something, but it's not just that, is it? It's also about, you know, if I was buying something, I go on and I look at how many stars it's got, and then I read what people have done, if they've used it, and what feedback they've given, positive or negative. So why would you not do that for a major investment? It wouldn't make sense not to, would it?
Yeah, I mean, everybody does it now, whether it's you're booking a hotel or anything, everybody looks at reviews, and quite rightly so. So the better reviews that are there to demonstrate how what kind of level of service you've got to provide, then it definitely helps.
Absolutely. So that's, we've established straight away it's a hedge against inflation. We've proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt how that works. I mean, you know, in the statistic I know about, because I've actually researched it, in the last 20 years, property prices in the UK have actually gone up 170%. But in the last 20 years, inflation's gone up 70%.
Yeah.
So there's 100% differential there in your investment. If you had invested 20 years ago, you would literally have hedged yourself to the tune of doubling your money. I mean, that's a good return considering interest rates were at a record low all that time. So, Perry, what would be the second one we'd need to talk about then?
So I think the second one, we've kind of touched on that a little bit with what we've talked about, haven't we? But rental properties have repetitive, regular monthly income, don't they? Whilst dividends from the stock market are dependent on there being profits, which in a recession they can be hit, can't they? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but even when you look at your pension, I recently got new pension statements and I've noticed the difference on the value of the pension. So you can start to see that all of these recession items potentially could be impacting us, but you won't get that in property because, as we've said, property holds it and you're getting repeat income constantly, aren't you?
Yeah. Plus the fact as well that because of the shortage of supply in the whole of the UK, it'll never be sorted out, to be honest. We know that because it's never been sorted out since time began and since records began. They've actually got that. The big council house sell-off in the 1980s through the Thatcher government decreased the social housing stock by 69%. And that has never recovered since then. Home occupiers in Fife have actually gone up as a result. So owner occupiers have gone up in Fife over the last 5 years by about 9,000 new homeowners in Fife. We have not even built, I mean, right throughout the whole of Scotland, you're lucky if all the house builders build in Scotland round about 20,000 houses a year. And yet in the last 5 years, the amount of homeowners in Fife have actually gone up 9,000 people, while the amount of investment properties have dropped 1,400 properties. So therefore, and you thought 5 years ago was bad, even now it's quite bad. We've got a complete restriction in supply just now of rental properties. It's becoming more and more mainstream as well. So it's almost like, you're always going to have demand for a rental property. But again, Richard and I will talk about this in sensitivity analysis on Monday, about the fact that depending on what areas you're in times of recession, in terms of Fife, you might actually find that people won't want to live in your house because, or in times of boom times, or oversupply of rental property, you might find that you might actually be the first one that suffers. And that's why we talk about sensitivity analysis and why that's so important in looking at buy-to-let proposition on Monday's show. Did I mention Monday's show?
Monday, 12:30.
Well taken.
What was that time again? Listen, we plug this all the time, and you say it's a shame. People go, "Oh, that's a shameless plug," and it's like, I couldn't care less if nobody listens to it. Reality is, it's a masterclass totally in how I became, well, I'm not going to say the word, how I became so successful in property investment over the last 30 years. And all I'm doing is passing this on to people free of charge. Yeah. No, I don't want anything from you. I'm not trying to do any upsell or anything. So if you don't listen to it, it makes no difference to my lifestyle. I feel like Ricky Gervais.
I mean, it's people's choice to come on and listen to it. If you want to be successful in things, it has got a lot on there. And we've got our usual followers and things, and they're always messaging us at the back end saying that was really great, thanks for that. And it is. I mean, there's no push or upsell with it.
Tell you what, a lot of them are actually excelling. They're actually going great guns now. They understand it. There was complete fear in the first place, and now it's like, wow, I know exactly what I should be doing now, and I just take advice now and again, and keep building my portfolio. So I'll cover. Probably the third one for me is existing landlords know that the rental properties achieve don't historically decline during recessions in the medium term. I mean, in 2008. Here's an example where it did. Fife rental market, or any rental market, dipped by about 5%, yet soon bounced back a year later. Now, here's a wee classic statistic for you don't know about. When I first started out 30 years ago, the average one-bedroom property was £240 a month. Now it's £374 a month. That's a 55% increase in rental income over the last 30 years. Now, it may not sound a lot, but if you look at the price of the property now, I bought, which was a one-bedroom, that property now is around about 400% appreciation in the last 30 years. Where did inflation go? Maybe about 20, maybe about 70, maybe about 80, or even 100%, but I've still made 300% more. And I've got rent as well at the same time, every single time.
Yeah.
So when you work,
I think that's the thing to always remember as well. Like we said, the property's generating income all the time as well. I think even though you say, Jim, that if average rents do go down, the rent's always fixed at the start of a tenancy. So I mean, if it's infrequent for the tenant, it is infrequent for the tenant to negotiate down. Depending on situations throughout a tenancy, it's very rare to negotiate down on a rental. So if rents were to dip, which is unlikely, and if so, it would only be slightly, your existing tenancies have already got their set rent. So that's something that you always need to keep in mind as well. Whereas during times like that, property prices might fall during recessions in terms of the sale value, but your rents should be fine.
But the key here, though, is if property prices do fall, it's immaterial if you're no selling.
No, if you've got a long term.
And that's what I keep saying to everybody. Everybody says, there's going to be a recession. Oh, my God. Property prices are going to drop 40%. And I'm like, and? your point is, it makes no difference to me because I'm no selling. So if you're no selling, it has no difference at all because the whole revenue is driven by the rental you get every single month.
Yeah.
And if you're getting rent every single month and there's a complete shortage of supply, even in a recession, what happens is, take the credit crunch. A few people lost their houses, okay? But they still have to rent houses as a result of that or buy another house. So they still have to go in and do something else. They can't just live with nothing over their head. They need a house. And because houses are still in shortage of supply, then they need a house, whether it's renting or whether it's buying again. But if they've lost it because of the recession, then they're clearly not going to get a mortgage, so they'll have to rent. So in the times of recessions, you usually find that the rental market booms. Yeah. But in times of booms, you usually find, guess what? The rental market booms because there's a complete shortage of supply. The boom can't accommodate for it. If you look at, we've got 1.1 million people unemployed. We've got 1.3 million jobs available. We can't even keep up with the number of jobs we need to do that. And that's not even where we are now in terms of building properties. Could you imagine the skilled workforce they're going to have to create as a result of that? And I'll be honest, this is Brexit has caused this problem. All these people that worked in that industry have disappeared home. Ta-ta, see you later. And we've caused ourselves a big, big problem in terms of supply. I mean, the great thing is, the benefit is the people that hold the property and the people that rent the property are going to benefit as a result of that, and regardless of what times it is. Even the councils got to the point where they're desperate to buy back property as much as they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
And they've come to me and they've actually said, we'll pay significantly more than what the home report value is. They've now come to that conclusion they're going to have to do that. No shit, Sherlock. It's like we didn't ken this, and it's taking you 2 years to work that out. You should have paid more than the home report, and that's why you weren't getting any properties, because everybody else is getting in there before you.
Yeah. Think you've got a buy-to-let portfolio. If you come into a period of recession where house values are dropping, you shouldn't be concerned because you've got that income, and naturally house prices are going to rise again. I mean, for instance, in 2008, the credit crunch recession, Fife property values dropped just about 16.5%, 16.44.
Hold it.
So dropping from
that's the exact increase that we had last year.
There you go. See, so it swings and roundabouts, and if you've got a long-term investment portfolio, that's not going to affect you.
So where did that drop from and to? Have you got these numbers?
Yeah, so obviously dropping from 127,287 at the peak in September 2007 down to 106,359 in March 2009 before it then started to rise again. So you see how that obviously that swings and roundabouts with property values. But if you're a buy-to-let investor, you've got a long-term investment portfolio, that's not going to affect you, and it'll come around again. So Terry, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's right what Jim says. That's 1.5 years that you saw that drop. But actually, that was how much of a rise we saw just in last year in properties just now. So go back to Jim's point earlier on, at the end of the day, if you're not selling, then it really isn't a problem. If you're an investor, chances are you're in it for the long haul. That's what you guys always educate on. It's, property investment's a long thing. If you're just going to get into property investment for a couple of years, then it's maybe not the thing to be doing, is it? It's something that you need to be doing for a long time.
That's why you need to make sure. That's why you need to make sure that you plan it. This is down to sensitivity analysis again. I'll keep saying this. It's not to plug the show, but it's actually, this is what I thought about all the time. Remember, I'm an accountant in the industry. I've been a cost accountant for years and years, and that's where I excelled in. And I more or less became a profit engineer in terms of what I was doing in industry and make things more efficient. Hence the reason why it's all come on to my buy-to-let business, my investment strategies, and everything that happens in here to make everything nice and easy to work and the fastest way to get the best results. That's really how I focus. So when you look at that in the last year, if that dropped 16.5%, everybody in the last year it moved, they've only moved into a house. It's like they're not going to move for about 5 or 6 years yet. So it's probably immaterial. And plus the fact if interest rates go up as well, and we might talk about that, but I'll talk about it now. If interest rates went up, about 90% of people are on fixed rate mortgages. So it doesn't matter. It makes no bearing on them at all. The only people it's going to affect is probably industry. It's borrowed. The companies that are borrowed on, base plus, 3% or something like that. So if interest rates do go up, they'll have to pay a higher amount. Then they go, okay, we've got to pay more interest payments. Then they have to go, right, okay, what we're going to have to cut back on because to make sure we still maintain a certain amount of profit. You see these companies making astronomical profits. But what you don't realise is they have to continue to make them because they've got so many shareholders they have to spread that evenly out through them. And these shareholders are pension funds that rely on that income to keep the pensions going. So this is where it all starts to fit in. Mm-hmm. So it's important to do that. I mean, Greggs was a typical example that I looked at a few years back. You know, Greggs was making something like about 16 or 17 million. I went, wow, that's a lot of money to make up for a baker. But then when you divided it out due to the number of stores they had, it was like 16 grand a store.
Really?
Aye. That was it. They were making on average £16,000 profit a store, because you had 1,000 stores and you divided that by 1,000, and then it was like 16 grand profit a store. And it's like, oh my God, I wouldn't even start for that. but then you've got to look at it. They look at it on the point of view that the intrinsic wealth of the company. This is like going back to the database thing. You know, you've got these companies that are failing, like, Friendly United was probably a classic example. A lot of people won't remember them. And they were the first Facebook. And everybody was getting on from school and they were collecting all their data. And in the next minute, Friendly United wasn't making any money, really. And Friendly United then was sold to British Gas for $3 million. Sorry? They're not making any money. But what was the intrinsic value was the data that they held on people. The data was more valuable, and that's where you get a lot of these companies actually building that. So that's why I go back to, and I'll bring it back to what I'm talking about the companies that make marginally the same amount for every single unit, and they don't really make that much, but it's the whole system. All they need to do is raise prices by 5%, and then their profits go through the roof because it goes straight to the bottom line. Because they've got a huge organization generating that wealth. So if they increase their turnover by 5%, the 5% goes right to the bottom. So 5% of 60 million is a hell of a lot more than 5% of 1 million turnover. And that's the fundamental difference. They have these compounding wealths in the small areas that if they make their efficiency a wee bit better, if they get your yield a bit better, if they get their stock flow a bit better, if they get their return and their turnaround a bit quicker, and these all compound out, and that's what makes the huge profit on the bottom line. But ultimately, if you take the number of shares a company's got like that and divide it by the total value of it made in profits, not turnover, if you in actual bottom line profits, you'll probably find out per share, it's not that marginal. It's not that much in comparison. It's just that there's a lot of shareholders involved, and that's why they make so much profits to be able to pay these people dividends, because they've all invested them with their pensions, and all these investment houses have invested in them as well, and small business people like ourselves have maybe bought individual shares in the stock market of them, and that's what makes the fundamental difference in it. Whereas I come right back to property and say, it's a no-brainer. The property goes up in value in the medium to long term, always. It's more or less guaranteed for you. You show me a time over the medium to long term that property's ever gone down in price, and it'll be a lot of rubbish. We're going to be talking about early Monday, Tuesday. The property price is 1952 because it's the start of the Jubilee. And we'll do them in comparison to what they are right now. So 1952 to now, and show you and demonstrate to you throughout that period the different prices that were there. And you will see categorically that if you invested in property, now I mean invest in property, I don't mean buy your own house. Because buy your own house isn't investing in property. It's buying your own house is you're changing like for like. Because the value of your house goes up by 100,000. Guess what? If you've got the same house that you're going to buy next, that's going up by 100,000 as well. So you've made no money. You've made nothing in your own property that you live in. You just get to use it, and you want to make it as efficient as possible, because ultimately it is seen as a liability. It does cost you money every single time, but it's the most cost-effective liability more than likely. However, renting is an even better option. And I talked about that on a previous wealth creation, where finally Elaine and I will rent, because it makes more sense for us to rent our property, because we could actually save a lot more money by renting. And actually get a lot more out of it by renting a property in our final years.
We spoke about that in the private Zoom session last Thursday as well, Jim.
Oh, did we? Okay. I mean, that's another thing as well. Anybody, if you're wanting to be involved in the private Zoom session, if you're an investor or if you're just thinking about getting started, don't be afraid. Just reach out to Richard or reach out to us in the messenger and say, look, what's this all about, the private investment you do once a month, your group? It literally is just you finding out what's going on, and it's almost an information session. It's really informal. It is not an upsell to anything else. Trust me, it is not an upsell to anything else. We're not selling you anything. We don't want you to drink our Kool-Aid. We couldn't care less. We're just telling you, this is how it is. You can make a ton of money. And if you don't want to listen, guess what? You don't need to listen. And the hardest part about this is you don't need to do it. That's it.
No.
You can sit on the couch and watch the telly and just no bother and watch the world go by and watch your pension and everything disappear. By the time you retire, you think, oh God, I'm going to have to take a job pushing trolleys at Sainsbury's.
I mean, that's one of the things.
By the way, no, there's anything wrong with that. But
I know. But what I'm saying is, most people don't envisage their retirement pushing the trolley at the shop and stopping the trolley at Sainsbury's and collecting the trolleys. But unfortunately, because of the circumstances they've not realised is coming, or what they've created as a result of what they've not done. This is about what you've not done. You will pay the price for what you don't do just now. But you need to do something now to hedge for your future, to look after your future. And for the younger generation, my father used to say to me this all the time in my 20s: make sure you invest in a pension, make sure you take a pension, make sure you take a pension. And I went, I've got another 50 years yet. Why would I want to do that? And then I realised now the value of compounding wealth. Wow. Why did I not listen to my dad? Why did I not listen? How stupid could you be? But that's the course you have to take, and the benefit you're getting right now is you're learning from our experience. You're learning from our wisdom. We're passing it on to other people so they can learn by our mistakes rather than learn by your own mistakes. Learning by your own mistakes is pretty costly on occasions. It could cost you lots and lots of money because you've made the mistake yourself. Why not just realize that other people have made this exact same mistake more than likely and just learn from that and make sure you don't make that mistake and just tweak it to make sure you don't make it. Okay, anyway, let's talk about rental guarantee payments. You know, what's with that then?
Yeah, I mean, guaranteed rental payments. I mean, insurances can be taken out for rental payments, and you can't get that on stocks and shares, which obviously, just in comparison, obviously, property investment to obviously normal investment in shares and things. So you don't get stocks in stocks and shares. And also, the government will cover most, or if not all, of rental payments for someone that's maybe made redundant, or they need to apply for social security and things like that, or on benefits.
That's the universal credit system.
Universal credit.
And often you find that the universal credit system is what puts a lot of landlords off. Now, just to make sure, just to let you understand this, it's not the fact that when people say they don't want people DSS, there's a classic example. It's not the person. They don't want to deal with the system.
The system is
the problem, not the person. The system is an immense problem to a lot of people. And if you understand that system and you understand how to use that system to your advantage and make sure you can get it through really efficiently, then when anything goes wrong, you're able to get in touch with that and you're able to sort everything out. Then you've got the wealth code broken, basically, because it pays dividends to know that. But you guys know that anyway, and I've taught you that.
Yeah, and well, I was just going to say, when I started out, it was all housing benefit. And Jim, you taught me how that all worked, and I worked with that for years and knew how it all worked. And then obviously they rolled out universal credit. And I remember hearing a lot of people like, oh, the system's terrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was flaws in the system and the system's terrible. But I was like, you just maybe didn't know how it works. But it's a lot better now. And I think it's like anything. Once you've got a better understanding it and know how to work it, it works. I mean, like I say, there was flaws with universal credit when it was rolled out. And there's still teething issues, but once you realise how...
I love when new things like that get sent out, and I love when new legislation changes take place as well. Yeah. Because a lot of landlords say, I'm selling up, I've had enough, I'm sick to death. And I'll go, your beauty, shortage of supply, rents go up, and I'm buying. It's like, because I understand the dynamics of the system and how the market works, and it will always be a need for rented property.
Yeah, I think as well. See, when you get a change in legislation, and that ultimately they happen periodically, and there's been a lot in the last few years. It's quite, for me as a letting agent and obviously managing property and things, it's quite rewarding to be able to learn that and add it as a skill and implement it, and kind of demonstrate that obviously you're doing things properly. And maybe just me, maybe I'm just sad like that. It's just, but it's quite good to learn and implement.
So let's jump on.
I think you're right, and a lot of it's down to education as well, isn't it? And if you're educated on it and you're patient with it and you're in it for the long term, you educate, you understand, you put it into practice, you get the rewards from it, don't you?
Yeah. And that's what our shows are all about as well.
Let's jump on to number 6 here, right?
Okay.
Perry, this is a question for you. For landlords that take out a mortgage, inflation can be a benefit? Really? Why is that?
Well, the first is the effect of inflation on the mortgage debt. As house prices rise over time, it reduces your loan to value. So, you may have you bought a property, say 100,000, you've got a £70,000 mortgage on it, say, and you're paying X amount of rate. But each month that you're paying your mortgage payment, you're indenting into that 70,000, you're reducing it, you're on a fixed rate, your property price is going up. So your 70 is going down to say 65, your 100 is going up to 105, and so on and so forth. And then that gap between what you're owing and what you can value the house at suddenly actually releases more capital for yourself. And that capital can be used in different ways.
Well. Yeah. So your rent goes up, your value goes up, but your mortgage stays the same. And you're borrowing it at a certain percentage, which is actually makes it efficient. And plus the fact, if you do it in a limited company, it's really tax efficient. And you can leverage yourself a little better. Whereas if you do it as an individual, you can obviously fall foul with the higher rate tax rules and the fact that you can only get mortgage interest at low rate deduction now, which is a different way, which has turned accountancy completely on its head, which is completely daft. So you're absolutely right. So the equity of the Fife rental property increases, assuming you fix your mortgage and your payments stay the same. Wow.
They do.
No brainer.
But not only that, though, because the value is increasing, you also then benefit from the fact that, I know mortgage rates are quite low just now, but they're not always at that rate that they're at the moment. But you can remortgage as well and get a better option, can't you? Because your loan to value.
You can remortgage as well, but if your intention is never ever to sell and you have it in a limited company, and that limited company can be passed on a trust, which is tax-free, by the way, to your children as generational wealth, then potentially there'll be huge benefits in that, and the fact that the rents will go up. You could remortgage them. You could remortgage and take money out. So if that's going to be passed on, you're never ever going to sell. This is where I keep saying about, a lot of people say it's tax-free money when you take out the higher rate. So say, for example, your property is 100,000 and it increases to 200,000 over 15, 20 years. So it doubles in value, increases to 200,000, but your mortgage is still 75,000. Okay. So now you go, I tell you what, I'm going to do a 75% loan to value. I'll get 150,000 out now. So I'll pay off my existing mortgage 75. I'll have 150, but my net increase is 75,000. I take that 75,000 and reinvest it in a property, another property that earns income again and appreciates in value.
Yeah.
So you're leveraging yourself again, but you're never, remember, this is a strategy where you're never ever selling. The difficulty of this is where people say, oh, it's tax-free money. No, it's not. If you're intending to realize that asset at some point in time, you will have to be paid. You will have to be prepared to pay for the gain, because you've got a property at 200,000 that you sell. You've got a mortgage now at 150,000, but you bought it for 100,000. So the differential, the gain, is £100,000 in these years. You're only allowed a tax allowance of £12,500. So you're then due money on £87,500 of capital gains. Now, if you're a high rate payer, then now you're due about 30% of that, which is about 30 grand. So you've got 200,000 minus the 30 grand, which is 170. You've got to pay off your 150. You're left with 20 grand.
Mm-hmm.
And my point is, if you're only left with 20 grand, why would you chop down the tree that bears the fruit?
Yeah.
Because it's probably earning more than that every single year. Mm-hmm. And that's where it comes back to opportunity cost and opportunity loss, if you actually did that and realized the gain. So that's why I say to most people, set your portfolios up as generational wealth, so it passes on to your children so they can look after them, but make sure it's passive and make sure someone else makes the decisions. A letting agent, it can actually run all that in the background, and it's not dependent on you. All you're doing is, I want to add another one to my portfolio, or I want to sell another one from a portfolio. That's all you need to get involved in doing. Other than that, a really good letting agent can pass it on to your children. Your children really don't need to know anything about being a letting agent or any legislation, because the letting agent just looks after it after that, and they still get money every single time. So it's truly royalty income. I see it as royalty income now. I see it as you've now written the book, you've now invested, you've now got the property, and it becomes royalty income because you get money regardless. It keeps just churning all the time. And it's no input from you at all. You could go and do another job. You can go and sit on a beach somewhere in the world. You can travel the world, and it's still earning money. Grow rich while you sleep. Your beauty. Imagine getting up in the morning and realising you're richer as a result.
Yeah.
Just because you went to your bed. Now, that's a good feeling.
It's a good plan. But it's true though. I mean, it's not just the equity that's increasing in your property. You know, assuming your mortgage is fixed, your payments stay the same. So you're not actually out of pocket. You're earning the increase in the value of the house. You're earning from the rent, and the chances are sometimes in a recession as well, rents will go up. So you're earning on the value and you're earning on the rent increase.
Yeah.
It's a win-win, isn't it? It's like a double dip.
So before anybody jumps in and says anything, the Scottish Government's obviously trying to mute the fact that they'll put rent controls in. But if you, again, we'll come back to sensitivity analysis, what we're going to talk about. If rent controls came in, this is one thing that you'd have to take into account of where your investment is right now. If rent controls came in, how would that affect you? That's, again, about sensitivity analysis, and we'll talk about that on Monday. So inflation helps the buy-to-let landlords because the rents tend to increase with inflation. The rents go up, the fixed rate mortgage, as you said, the payments stay the same, creating the prospect of more significant profit in your buy-to-let investment. Yeah, there's downsides to renting, is there?
Yeah. Well, I think
we'll have to talk about that.
People always have concerns about renting, and it's always the most common ones that we hear. But I think, like you just explained, Jim, and I think what I would always recommend is that if you've got an agent in place, a lot of these aren't going to be such an issue. I think, for instance, rent arrears. Rent arrears is right up there. Rent arrears can be a worry. However, during 2021, landlords who used an agent were, according to, there was an investigation by Tenant House Research, 272.5% less likely to be in arrears of 2 months or more if they were using an agent as opposed to managing it themselves. The rent arrears is a big one that concerns people, and it's what if my tenant doesn't pay? How am I going to handle that? And if you're on your own, it can be quite time consuming. So an agent, a good agent, does that for you.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest reasons though is there's more stringent tenant referencing.
Yeah.
That letting agents tend to do, and you also find that tenants that would maybe play the game and try to get rental for nothing after getting in the property tend to stay away from letting agents because they know they'll know their referencing properly, and they'll find out that in their background, and therefore they'll not get it. So it's almost a lost cause. What these type of people do is they prey on people on Gumtree. And, the single landlord are just like, I'm going to save some money. I'm going to save £50 a month, which is effectively about £1.75 a day. I'm going to try and save £1.75 a day. You'll spend that on your coffee, if not double that. Every single day you're trying to save money and you end up getting the wrong tenant, and if they just missed 1 month's payment, you've effectively lost about, what is the average rent? About 550 quid? You've lost 550 quid like that. Yeah. So that's 50 quid you've tried to save for the month, but you've lost 550 quid, which is 11 months worth of management fees. So if you've got a management company in the first place, you probably would have saved yourself that money and it would have paid for itself. We spoke to someone the other day, didn't we? And he says he's got £16,000 in arrears now. And oh my God. And how long was that? Sorry? 3 years. 3 years. I said, if you come to us and you had spoken to us in the beginning, now it wasn't when we were managing, they decided to do let only for themselves, and they say, oh no, I'll let it myself. And it's like, it's cost them £16,000 and they've still got to try and evict the person. They're not even at that stage yet. So that'll be another 6 months, or probably to a year, depending on whether the First Trade Tribunal will actually hear it or not. So I do
feel for them.
Absolute fortune. And when you think about it, it's about 600 quid a year to have your property managed.
Yeah.
That's mental.
It's very costly, isn't it?
272% more likely or less likely to be in arrears of 2 months or more if you use a letting agent. So what we do is we're referencing tenants carefully in job security, stability, and the history of non-payment of rents as well. I think, Richard, you talked about. I mean, I only know this because you do this, obviously, and I know that because I've taught you. Always liaising with the previous landlords and agents to see if they were a good tenant. But more importantly as well, now and again, I've actually popped around to somebody's house in the olden days, in the good old days. Actually, when I thought, oh, there's a wee thing at the back of my mind that thinks, oh, there's something no right here. It's like, oh, I'm in the neighbourhood. Can I pop in and see you now and have a wee chat about your tenancy you might have with us? And then I get in the door and I go, okay, do you mind if I have a wee look round to your house? And it's like, you see if it's a shit tip or no. That's it, really. In a nutshell. That's what you're looking at. It's like, this is a bomb site. There's no way you're getting another property, but you don't tell them that. So that's another way of making sure you would actually find out if anybody was any good or not, and just to make sure they are. Oh, I keep my house really clean, and then you walk around and it's like, oh my god, there's car shite on the carpet. You say oh, but genuinely I've actually seen that. I have actually seen that, literally on the carpet and stuff like that, and nappies lying about in the corner and everything like that, and they actually think they're going to be an ideal tenant for one of your properties. And I'm going, oh, well, you probably have to come up with a deposit and a first month's rent. Oh, I can't afford that. Good, you'll not get it then.
Yeah. I mean, finding the right tenant in the first place is one of the most important, in fact, if not the most important element of having a successful buy-to-let. And a big part of that is the referencing process. And you'll find that when we do the referencing process and we do all these checks on obviously the previous addresses, previous landlords, previous agent, their employment, their income, if they are really upfront and transparent about that and cooperative and do you know what I mean? That's the whole process, and meeting them in person, plus everything on paper goes hand in hand to determining whether they're right for the property, whether it's going to be a successful let.
If you're a DIY landlord and do it yourself, you really can't get access to that information because we get access through certain partners, and it costs a lot of money to actually be involved in these organisations in the first place to get access to that information and the tenant reference and credit reference. And a solid reference is not 100% guarantee. I've got to say that, but you won't get rent arrears or have your rental property trashed. Yeah, it'll go a long way to mitigate it, as well as the other things that we get involved in asking as well. One of the things about investing rental properties in Fife, for example, is that buy-to-let investors have more control over their returns than their stock market investors. But buy-to-let also provides a long-term stability and constant income to counterweight the massive swings you see in the FTSE stock market. I mean, it must be habitual for me. My pension, I mean, to be honest, I couldn't care less about my pension. It is minuscule in comparison to what I've got already, in terms of my portfolio and everything like that. But I like tracking it to just do comparisons. But literally, when my pension's no really a fantastic return, and all I've done is track the stock market all that time. Now, in comparison, the kids' pensions, you can get kids' pensions, which I took out at birth for some of them, and some of them later on. Their pensions have grown phenomenally over that time, and by the time they retire at 50-year-old, they will never need to worry about income ever again, for that reason. And that's why I did it. Just put small amounts in. And I'm only putting small amounts in. And then when I do have the opportunity, then I'll top it up to the end of the year. And the taxman actually tops it up to the basic rate. So if you put £2,880 in to a kids' pension fund, now you can put it in your grandkids' pension fund as well. The government will top it up to £3,600. So they're literally giving you free money to go towards their pension for when they retire. So that's, if over 50 years, if you're putting the maximum amount in to get up to the basic rate, you're putting 144,000 in over 50 years, remember, and they're topping up to about 188,000. They're bumping. You're getting free money for the government, almost £44,000 more over that time, just by you've got access to that for the government for putting in pensions. That's why you should always utilise it. You should always take out a child's pension from birth if you can, and literally just put 10, 20, 30 quid a month in. You get a salary rise, put some aside, put into that pension every single time for your child, and then put some aside for yourself. That's all you need to do. If you're disciplined, you do yourself that every single time, or you get a wage increase or anything like that, or you get anything, you have come in a wee windfall, put a wee bit aside in your kids' pension, put it in there, because it will grow and compound. The first 5 years doesn't grow that much, but that's compounding. By the time you get to almost the difference between, look at the difference between 1 pence doubled up every day for 31 days. At the 30th day, 1 pence doubled up for 31 days is 5 million. At the 31st day, it's 11 million.
And what?
When you started out on the very first day, it was 1 pence to 2 pence.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows you the value. That shows you in a nutshell the value of compounding wealth.
And what would you recommend, Jim? Just like standard life, or?
Well, ours are standard life stakeholder pension for children. Standard Life have it. They're now Aberdeen Asset Management or something like that. It's taken
A lot
over
of people don't know this.
And then I just said, look, just put it onto the stock market. Stock market and their risk categories. Now, this is how they view investing in the stock market. They're high risk, apparently, in the UK stock market. They've got a thing from 1 to 7. And they actually say 7 is the most riskiest, which is overseas and emerging markets. 1 is the safest, which is probably bonds, government bonds, which gets no return at all, to be honest. Mostly people, when they're about to retire, they put their money from one side into the bonds to keep it stable in case there's any changes in the short term, to make sure it's secure. But Standard Life and the investment houses actually look at the stock market around about a 6. So that shows you where it is in terms of their risk. They actually see the stock market as high risk. That's the pension funds. And yet property is completely different. Even the bank look at property. The bank won't let you invest in the bank stocks, right? They wouldn't give you money to invest in their stock, but they'll give you money to invest in a property. What does that say about what the banks think about property?
Yeah, that's more lucrative than stocks.
Well, it is more lucrative, and there's also that thing as well about just being able to touch it, isn't it? It's the bricks and mortar. It's something that's visible to everyone, isn't it?
Yeah. So this buy-to-let counterweights the huge swings in the stock market, whether a company can pay it or not. That's a big difference. There is something reassuring about actually touching and feeling your investment, like bricks and mortar. Just putting your hand in it and going, yeah, it's there. But ideally, just to round up, you've kind of got to make your own decision when investing in the private rented market, especially in Fife. I mean, Fife's really good. There's good returns. Fife is still completely undervalued as far as I'm concerned in terms of prices, compared to the Scotland and compared to the rest of the UK. If you like to chat about it, feel free and talk about it. Final words for you, Richard, on this. After reading all this and discussing all this, what's your thoughts on this?
I think as we've looked back at obviously the previous recession back in times gone, and looked at how rental property investment has performed in comparison to the stock market and things, it's a no-brainer. And I think that as a really good way to obviously have income generated on a long-term basis. And don't be deterred by all these things that come with letting and property investing, because if you've got the right people or got the right people on hand to do things or advise you how to do things properly, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. What about yourself, Perry?
I think for me as well, it's about people understanding that swing, isn't it, and where the investments are, and the negative impact, whilst it will be that it's very going to be limited in time if you've invested in property rather than your money sitting in the bank. And if you've got a professional guide that can hold your hand through that process, then you've got guaranteed income that may well be in short-term hit, but actually long-term is always going to benefit you.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll leave the last word with Andrea. Don't let your property Amber Heard. And it's goodbye from him, and it's goodbye from her.
And it's goodbye from him, and it's goodbye from her.